school being built, a brand new school, but instead of it being built in a part of Cleveland that could be integrated, it was built in a more segregated part of Cleveland. And there was a young minister. They tried to stop the building with a demonstration. And at that demonstration, his name was Bruce Clunder. He was a Presbyterian minister. And he stepped in front of the bulldozer and was killed.
Okay, now what point in time was it that he came to your church, and in relation to his I Have a Dream sermon?
He gave his I Have a Dream sermon, I believe it would have been about 5 years before this particular time when he came to our congregation. I mean, that was what put him on the national stage. There's no question about it. That dream just caught fire all across the world. But I was on a committee that was appointed to work on the election of Carl Stokes. And people may remember that Carl Stokes, when he was elected as mayor of Cleveland, he was the first African-American mayor of a major American city ever elected in the history of the United States.
How did that play out? Were people supportive?
Well, it was a very difficult election because the fact there'd never been an African American before. And one of the things that Dr. King knew very well was it was a crucial election, not just for Cleveland, it was a crucial election nationally. Because what Dr. King knew was that it was part of the civil rights struggle. And if a city the size of Cleveland could elect a black mayor, then black mayors could be elected all around the country, which is exactly what has happened in our history. And so Dr. King knew that if Carl Stokes was going to be elected, we had to get out the black vote. And so the National Council of Churches, which I knew nothing about at that time, funded a major national campaign to do a get out the vote in Cleveland for the election of Carl Stokes, because his election became not just a local election, it was very much a national election. If CNN had existed in those days, which it didn't, everything happening to Carl Stokes would have been breaking news. He was definitely the person to watch. And so many of the local churches gave money to help support the Get Out the Vote campaign, which meant that Dr. King came to Cleveland on a regular basis. And one time when we were in the middle of one of these meetings, Dr. King said, you know, it's a sad thing for me that I've been to Cleveland so many times and I've never been invited to a white church. And as inexperienced and as young as I was 32, I think, at the time, I just said, well, I want to invite you to our congregation. Well, I had no idea what the result of that would be. We had a young minister. He was also, I think, 33 at that time. He was a strong worker for civil rights. He preached a lot of sermons on justice and on racial justice. And so I think, rightly thought, well, this is a congregation that would certainly welcome Dr. King.
Now, was there something that inspired you about Dr. King personally?
Oh, yes, there's no question about what Dr. King changed my life. I was impressed by a number of things. First of all, he was charming. He was very funny. He had a great sense of humor. He didn't take himself terribly seriously. I mean, you really would have had no idea what a great man he was, because he was fair and square all the time. And I think the thing that most inspired me was that he did what he said he would do. I have to tell you that when Obama became the president, and I was at the inauguration, and I don't know why, but I never can do this very well. When I woke up that morning, I looked in the mirror, and I thought if Dr. King were alive, he'd only be 2 years older than I am. And all of a sudden it seemed so tragic to me that he had died so young, because I thought he could be as alive and as vital as I am. And he could be there speaking about the election of the first African American president. And so it all kind of came back home again.
You wrote a book this year.
Right.
It's called Living into Hope, a call to spiritual actions for such a time as this. Did you include any of this in your book?
Yes, I did. And there's 2 or 3 mentions in the book of Dr. King, because he was so instrumental in my own history and in my own spiritual journey. It was very important. I think probably nobody else more than Dr. King helped me to see that if you're going to say you believe in something, you have to act it out. You can't just say you believe in it. And that probably is the major lesson that I learned from him. His commitment was so strong.
Is there anything else you remember about when he came to the church?
Oh, there's lots of things I remember. I mean, I remember my how I felt when I went to the back door of the church. And though I had seen him before, and I'd never been in charge of anything where he was the speaker, and when I went to the back door of the church to let him in, I still remember how I felt when I shook his hand and asked him to come walk through the church. And I felt so embarrassed when I said, "I'm sorry, Dr. King, but you have to speak outside." Well, he was fine with that. He said, "That's fine. Don't worry about it, child. Don't worry about it." And it was he's always very welcoming, and I never felt a mean-spiritedness from him. I saw him be disappointed. I saw him be angry. But I never saw him be bitter or cruel. His anger was usually that people, and often some of his anger was at the black community, that they weren't giving of themselves the way he thought they should be. And this was very important to him, that he thought we're never going to win this battle if everybody doesn't get out there and work on these issues. The church could not come to an agreement that he should speak inside the church. As it turns out, the church only holds about 400 people. About 3,000 people came to hear him. So in the providence of God, it's probably a blessing he spoke outside, because he had many, many more people that came. And as far as the eye could see, people were gathered. And there was a very funny thing, because the sound system at the church never worked right. But that day it was perfect. Was crystal clear, and
the work of God.
If you wanted to be magical about it, you would say this couldn't have been an accident. And of course, it was a beautiful sunny day. The other thing everybody worried about was, what will we do if it rains? And I just kept saying, it's not going to rain. I, of course, had no idea whether it would rain or not. But it didn't rain, and so he was received by many, many people. And to this day, there is now a plaque on the back door of that church that says, during the ministry of Albert M. Pennybacker, who was then the pastor, Dr. Martin Luther King spoke from these steps, and he said these words: Well, let's talk for 1 minute about Carl Stokes.
Oh, sure, yes.
Because what really was the victory out of Dr. King's appearance, the first time Carl Stokes ran for mayor, he lost. Okay. And the second time that he ran for mayor, he won. And Dr. King's presence made all the difference that there was. And by that time, he had a very strong group of white people, including a very strong members of the Jewish community, who raised money for him, who worked for him. And my daughter and I were campaigning on the west side of Cleveland, which at that point was all white. Cleveland was very divided. East side was where all the African Americans lived. West side was where most of the white population lived. And when we went over there to demonstrate and passed out flyers, people yelled at us and they called us names, and they said, "Don't come in our neighborhood. We don't want this man to be our mayor." And my daughter, who was about 11 years old then, turned to me and said, Mommy, why would anybody want to be mayor of this city when people are so angry about it? And of course, she herself then became the first woman mayor in 200 years of the city of Cleveland. There's a local congregation that's part of Chautauqua that is active all year long, not just in the summer, but in the winter as well. And so on January 15th, we always have a ceremony, unless it happens to be on a Sunday, and then we do the nearest Monday, where we invite people from the local community to come. And we usually, we have music and people talk about their stories.
We meet up the very next day at his favorite local cafe, and as we sit, he pulls a Bible from his bag. Verse by verse, song by song, sheds light on the path I'm on. And over coffee, I know Christ is not a fad. The emptiness inside me is now filled. The gift is free, Jesus has paid the bill. So if you're restless in your heart and your soul needs a jump start, don't you wait to get up by the